everyone, depending. It's Wednesday today, and we are back for another confidence convo. This is episode 15, and this week we're diving into your inner critic. So before we get started, I'd love to introduce myself. I am Davina Maria, and I am a master coach and founder of the Restore Yourself method and host of Worthy Women Facebook group. And I help female go-getters in their 30s develop unshakable confidence so they can powerfully step into their limitless potential. Over to you, Joanna.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Davina. My name is Joanna. I'm a registered psychotherapist and confidence coach and the founder of the Confidence Formula. I work with young adults to help them improve their self-confidence so that they can be successful. Davina and I got together to create this for you because we are obsessed with all things personal development and we strongly believe in the power of learning together.
And just to clarify, we are not perfect at being confident all of the time. Like you, we move through our struggles and overcome obstacles and mindsets to continuously improve. So just think of us as guides by your side.
Yeah. And today we want to talk about something really interesting, something that everybody has, most people here, some people are aware of, something that's trying to help us, but often comes across rather cruel. And that thing is our inner critics. Your inner critic, mine, Davina's, we all have one, and that's what we want to talk to you about today. So if Davina wouldn't mind, I would love to hear what you define as an inner critic. What does that mean to you?
So I define an inner critic as self-talk. That's how I kind of think about it, and that's how I kind of rationalize it in my head. And we have different types of self-talk. So I would say the inner critic is the internal self-talk that is maybe critical, pessimistic, and maybe sometimes a little bit rude, disrespectful, challenging. So, to kind of encompass all of those words into one thing, I suppose we could call the inner critic our negative self-talk.
So are you implying then that maybe we have multiple self-talk?
Well, that is a really interesting question. I've never thought about whether we've got multiple, but I know that, well, there might be two answers. Answer number one might be that we do have multiples. We have an inner critic and we have an inner loving self-talk person. Or answer number two might be that we can shape the inner critic into a more loving self-talk person, and perhaps depending on our self-care, circumstances, tolerance, etc., perhaps there's a sliding scale, and depending on where you are on that day, you kind of slide along the scale, between being really critical of yourself or not so critical of yourself. So I'd actually love to hear what you think on that.
Yeah. And I think what I was going to ask, but now I'll just share, is that I think it can be both, right? I think we have a very loving, compassionate voice inside of us that, again, some of us might be aware of and others might not be aware of, which is okay. And we can adjust our inner critic to be more or less critical, like using that spectrum that you're talking about.
I love that. So there was something that you said in the intro that really got my attention. And you said that the inner critic is trying to protect us. I'd love to talk about that a bit more.
Yeah. So why I said that is because of the field of therapy that I study. It's internal family systems. And the belief is that everything that you do is with the intention for your protection or safety or survival. I guess that's like basic therapy, not even internal family systems. Like everything that your body, your brain does is for your self-preservation in a way.
Interesting.
And so the way that I think about the inner critic, you know, and I'll give a little bit of a preface to this. So basically, the way I think about my inner critic is this inner voice that can be sometimes demeaning, sometimes critical, often expresses frustration or disapproval about my actions or my life and situation.
Okay.
Right? That's kind of how I think about this part of me. And it says things like, you should do X, Y, or Z, right? Or you didn't do X when you could have or should have.
Yeah.
Or what's wrong with you? Or you're a loser, or you won't achieve anything in life, or nobody likes you. Like all of these negative comments can come from one's inner critic, right? Some of those things, you know, my inner critic says to me, and some of those things, you know, other people's inner critic might say to them. And it's important to kind of understand that the frequency, I guess, and the intensity of everyone's inner critic is differently, but everybody does have one.
Okay.
Right? And so, did you want to add something?
No, I think that's really interesting because if everyone has one, I feel like it's really comforting in a way to know that. And, you know, if your inner critic is really prevalent and they are kind of talking to you all day, every day, I think it's really comforting to know that potentially the person next to you is in a similar situation. I think that's really, really powerful. And you mentioned internal family systems, and obviously we don't want to kind of go too deep into that, but I have done a little bit of research myself on internal family systems, and I love the kind of the background of knowing that your inner critic is there to protect you, because I feel like you can actually be grateful for it, which I think kind of flips the script a little bit. It makes it not so I don't know, it's almost like, okay, I don't need to reject my inner critic. I don't need to fight against it. I can actually be grateful for the protection, and I can be comforted that I'm not alone in this and that everybody has an inner critic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to explain like some of the benefits of the inner critic, because I know, you know, some of us know a lot of the, you know, negative or disadvantages of having a very active inner critic. It can also be really helpful, right? Your inner critic is almost like this voice inside of you that's trying to protect you from failure, from embarrassment, you know, and if you maybe fail or embarrass yourself, maybe you won't be part of the collective, part of the community, and rejection is probably the most difficult feeling or situation to overcome as a human being. Like we need to be in community, so the feeling of rejection can be really powerful.
Yeah.
The inner critic also, it encourages us to move forward in life, right? If I'm not good enough now, what can I do to become better? What can I do to evolve? And so I kind of explain it to my clients in this way, and I say, you know, we all have an inner critic, we all have this negative voice that's always pushing us to move forward for evolutionary reasons, right? If we were comfortable living in caves, sleeping on rocks, we would still be living in caves, sleeping on rocks. But because our inner critic was like, hey, this sucks, you know, it's uncomfortable, through, you know, time and experience, we've developed beds, we've developed homes, we've developed more like comforts and things that make us, you know, feel better, right? So that's part of that like evolutionary purpose to move forward in our lives and progress as a society, right? And without that negative voice, we might just be sleeping on rocks and living in caves, right?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of benefits to having an inner critic, although it's not commonly, you know, discussed when we think about inner critic. It's like this cruel, negative, harsh, nasty voice that lives inside of us. But there are definitely benefits. So that's why I say it's there to protect you.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So thinking about everyone having an inner critic, and you know, we're all kind of on a level playing field here, what would you say it feels like to have one?
I would say the emotions that come to mind when I feel my inner critic are like shame, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
Also anxiety, like that feeling of like wanting to be accepted, wanting to be connected, wanting to do better, but feeling like it's kind of like too far out of reach, or I'm like, struggling to kind of get there. Um, you feel kind of deficient, less than, kind of with the shame. Also, like behaviorally, it can lead to like inaction.
Yeah.
Right. So like, as much as like, so I also kind of think of it this way. It's almost like this like inner coach almost, like if you ever were part of like a competitive sports team, and like the coach is like, okay, like do it this time, and like do it better, and like, shoot the ball this way or kick the ball that way. It's like kind of like telling you what you're doing wrong to tell you how to do it right. Right. And for some people, I guess in society, kind of culturally speaking, we've kind of normalized that way of motivating ourselves,
Yeah.
right? If I'm bad at something, tell me I'm bad at it so I can do better, instead of like kind of compassionately, lovingly, asking me to do it better. Because a coach could just say like, oh, that was really great, and the next time we'll do it like this way. And the team player might hear that differently than like, do it this way, or you did it wrong and do it this other way. So there's like different ways you can communicate things. But as a society, I feel like we've kind of normalized motivating ourselves with, kind of guilt-induced shame.
Yeah.
And so that inner critic is kind of like an internalized voice that's like trying to motivate us, but doing so in the more negative, cruel kind of way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, I think most people are motivated in some way by lack or pain. But that's not the only motivation. And you've touched on that in what you've just said, in that sometimes you're motivated towards desire, something that you just want, and you're motivated to go and get it. But I think you're right about society and kind of the conditioning that, this is the way to be motivated. I'm going to be mean to you to make you do whatever you feel you should do or should not do. And I'm going to make you feel shame and maybe a little bit of guilt, a little bit of anxiety. But yeah, I think it all comes from a place of lack, doesn't it? Rather than, a really abundant kind of positive place. So I love what you've spoken about there. And I think the feelings are so key for me, because I think, knowing what something feels like sometimes is half of the explanation of what it is. And if anyone is in doubt about whether they do have an inner critic or not, I think if you do have any thoughts that make you feel ashamed, you could probably link the two together and say, oh, that's my inner critic, just giving me a little warning sign and giving me something to kind of think about, focus on, and almost like an alarm system. So I wanted to ask a little bit about what your inner critic might sound like.
Yeah. So I think I like shared some things that it can say to you, right? You should do this, why didn't you do it that way? Why didn't you do this instead? You suck, right? You're just worthless. You're not going to achieve anything. You're too fat. You're too skinny. You're too much. You're not enough. Like it can say all kinds of things. And I think one thing that's important for me to share is that it can sound like it's you talking to you.
Interesting.
And I think that that's really important, because I often ask my clients, so, who does your inner critic sound like? And they're like, well, it's me talking to me. And I'm like, I get that. I get that you say these things to yourself, but who does it sound like? Like who in your life would say things like that to you? Was it a coach? Was it a parent? Was it a teacher? Was it a friend? Was it a bully? Like who said that kind of stuff to you? Because I believe that when you're born, you're not born speaking negatively to yourself. You're taught how to do that. And so our inner critic kind of becomes internalized negative voice that lives inside of us, that while it might sound like we're talking to ourselves, might have our voice per se, it might not actually. It might also have someone else's voice. The things that it says to you are internalized comments from the outside world.
I absolutely love that. I think when you've said that, who does it sound like? I actually kind of thought of my inner critic and I was like, who do they sound like? And maybe it's because I've done a fair amount of work on this sort of stuff that I can't answer that. I don't know who it sounds like. But that's really, really interesting because you've touched on, does it sound like someone from your childhood or from school or from, a job? I absolutely love that because I think that's really helpful for anyone who's trying to kind of, deal with the inner critic. It's really, I think it's a really good thing to know who it sounds like because that gives you kind of an insight into, well, your relationship with that person. And also, I think you can then kind of release a lot of what your inner critic says. If you feel like it sounds like someone else, you can, again, kind of accept that that's not your stuff. So you can kind of just say, what, I'm releasing that because it's not mine. I've kind of, I've put it on my back like a backpack, but it's not actually mine. So I don't need to carry it with me. I absolutely love that. But I am going to sit and think about who mine sounds like because I think that is, that's key.
Yeah. It might be a little bit off topic at this point, but can you say a little bit more about like that's not my stuff? Like what does that mean and how can people become aware of like what's their stuff and what's not their stuff?
So I think with conditioning and we're talking about inner critic, I think it is actually quite linked and related. If let's give an example. Let's imagine your inner critic sounds exactly like your dad. And let's imagine that your dad brought you up to be the best of the best. He just wanted you to be really good at school, really good at sports, A-star student, and he was not going to accept anything less. He had a very high standard. And let's imagine he would say things like, you'd come home from school and maybe you got 80% on a test. And you were proud of yourself and you were like, hey, Dad, look, I got 80%. And let's imagine he looks at that and he goes, what happened to the other 20? I think as a younger, even a child or a teenager, that can be like quite a kind of a demoralizing thing to hear because you're proud of your achievement. Maybe that's a really hard subject. Maybe you don't get on with maths and you felt like 80% is like a miracle. And then someone's gone, well, you haven't really done enough. It's not good enough, really. So nothing to be proud of. So let's imagine that you carry that through your life. And every time you kind of don't hit the mark, the inner critic is going, didn't quite make it, almost doesn't count. You're not good enough. You'll never hit A-star. And let's imagine you're becoming, I don't know, a lawyer, an accountant, whatever. You've got, a massive exam to write and you're so close to being qualified. And it might then, the imposter syndrome might kick in and the anxiety might kick in and the inner critic might be going, what's the point? Why bother turning up? You're not going to pass. You're not going to get more than 80%. You're an 80% student. You're average, And I think knowing who your inner critic sounds like, and if you know that it's protecting you and it's helpful, you might then think, okay, my inner critic sounds like my dad. My dad was constantly pushing me to be perfect. As an adult, I know that perfect doesn't exist. So my dad wanted the best for me and he did the best he could, albeit with maybe, the motivation could have been better. How would I like to motivate myself? Well, I would like to motivate myself by, setting the mark that I would like to get, trying to manifest that, and then doing the work to achieve it. And even if I don't hit 100%, I'm still going to be proud because I've done better than last year, last week, last month. And then I think at that point, you can kind of thank the inner critic and say, thank you so much for helping me work through this. I release the need for perfection in my life. And I know that was my dad's kind of wish for me or my dad's, plan for whatever. And it's not mine. Like, I don't even know why he did it. I don't know the reasoning behind it because it's not mine. I don't have, the logical explanation for it. And that's how I know it's not mine. Therefore, I'm not going to strive for perfection anymore. I'm going to do the best I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. well put. And giving that, back to dad, or giving that away off your back.
Yeah.
You said things in a backpack, like not carrying that through the world anymore and trying to be perfect when, as an adult, you're comfortable being good enough.
100%.
That's
So
for
I
sure.
know that we're quite close to the end, but I really think it would be so good if we can kind of share some of our tips on how we deal with our own inner critic. So I don't know if you have one or two, and I'm happy to share one or two as well.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
I'd love to go first. So one of the most funniest things that I do, and this is why when you said, oh, what does your inner critic sound like? Or who do they sound like? I was a bit like, oh, I don't know. And that's because I pretend that my inner critic has the voice of like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. And that way, when it tells me all of these negative things, I actually find it funny because it sounds a little bit
That's
ridiculous.
good.
Um, so yeah, whenever I kind of, have the kind of voice in my head, I just imagine it being said in like, very squeaky Mickey Mouse like voice. And I tend to laugh. And then another thing that I do that follows on really nicely from that is I write down the things that it says. And then I logically think about it. And I imagine, let's imagine my inner critic says, oh, I don't know, what's an example? You're useless, for example. So I would take that, I would imagine it in the, Donald Duck voice. I'd have a little laugh, I'd smile, which naturally makes me feel better. And then I'd write it down on a bit of paper that says, I'm useless. And then what I would do is logically just think through that and find evidence for it. What evidence is there that
Mm-hmm.
I'm useless? And most of the time, I can't find the evidence. And then I say, okay, so if you can't find the evidence that you are useless, what's the evidence of the opposite? And then you start listing things. And even if you only list 5 things of evidence that's opposite to I am useless, you walk away from that whole experience thinking, do you know what? I've heard the inner critic, I've processed what it said, and I've kind of logically thought through it, processed it all, and I feel good. I know I'm not useless, so I can walk away, knowing that. That's probably not the best example in terms of the protection
No,
and all of that, but yeah, those are 2 things I do to help.
I love the Donald Duck voice. I'm going to use that. It's so good because when it sounds like you, it can be really hurtful and it can feel like it's, your true self
Yeah.
speaking to you. But when you give it like the voice of Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse, that's hilarious. I'm going to try that. So thank you for that. I guess kind of similarly, one of my favorite things to do with my inner critic is kind of imagine like what it will look
Mhm.
like. Some people imagine like, a gremlin or a werewolf or like that like devil that lives on your shoulder
Yeah.
or like whatever it is, or your coach or your, parent or, who it could be an actual real person if you want, or a character in a movie, Mrs. Trunchbull or like whoever, right? So you kind of give it like an image of what they look like, and then start to notice when it's speaking, and when it's speaking, make sure that you're thinking that it's Miss Trunchbull's talking to you instead of you talking to you, and then kind of creating some separation between you and this part. And that can be really helpful just to kind of get some space from this part, know that you're not the critic speaking to you, you're actually the observer,
Yeah.
the person like listening to the critic.
Mm.
And then from there, what goes really nicely with that is identifying, if you can, how it's hurting
Mhm.
you when you hear Mrs. Trunchbull speaking that way to you, and at the same time, how it's helping you, right?
Mm.
So, kind of going back to what we were talking before. So, kind of building a relationship with the inner critic. Or so you could like build a relationship with Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck,
Yeah.
right? And like build a relationship with this part, because if we all have it, it's probably not going anywhere, right? So can we transform, like you said at the beginning, our relationship with this part instead of trying to say, no, you're wrong, I'm right.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can say about it, right? So building a relationship with your inner critic can become really helpful.
I
So kind of giving it a name, listening to what it says to you. That's a lot of tips all in one. How it's helping you, how it's hindering you, and then building a relationship with it. That's like 7 tips.
Right? I love that. And I think I'm definitely going to use all of those tips. I think now, instead of hearing Donald Duck, I'm going to visualize Donald Duck as well. And, when I go to write down what my inner critic says, I'm definitely going to think about, right, how is this helping me and how is this hurting me? I think that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic.
Cool. A lot of great stuff to work on.
Definitely. So unfortunately, we're at the end of this episode, but I have to say it's been so great chatting about this. I think this is a really interesting topic. We're not back in 2 weeks' time, we're back in 3 weeks' time, and I believe that makes it the 6th of September. And for more information on who we are, what we do, and our love of all things confidence and self-development, you can find or follow us from our social media information posted below in the comments. And if you like what you've heard, please feel free to share, subscribe, or like, and we will see you in 3 weeks' time.
See you soon.